The city woke each morning like a man standing with one foot in yesterday and the other chasing tomorrow. Glass buildings rose into the sky, their windows catching the sun like sharp eyes, while beneath them old streets breathed slowly. Market women still spread cloth on the ground at dawn. Elders still poured a little water to the earth before speaking of serious things. Drums no longer ruled the nights, but their memory lived in the rhythm of footsteps and traffic horns. In this city, tradition did not shout. It waited. People hurried past shrines without looking, chasing money, titles, and new names. Yet at every crossroads, something ancient watched. Grandmothers still said, "A road may change its face, but it never forgets where it began." It was a place where ambition ran fast, and wisdom walked behind, steady and patient. At the center of the city stood a girls' school with high walls and iron gates. Its buildings were painted bright, its gardens trimmed like royalty's hair. The school carried a powerful name, spoken with pride by parents who wore expensive clothes and heavy rings. To attend this place was not just education, it was proof of importance. Inside those walls, surnames mattered more than effort. Daughters of ministers, business tycoons, and powerful chiefs walked with lifted chins. Teachers greeted some girls with warmer smiles, not because they were kinder, but because their families were louder. The school did not write its rules on paper alone. It wrote them in looks, whispers, and silence. During assembly, girls compared shoes and phones instead of lessons. "That one's father owns half the city," one would murmur. "That one's mother eats at tables we will never see," another would reply. Tradition was mentioned only on cultural days, worn like a costume, then folded away. Respect was no longer earned. It was inherited. The hallways shone, but they were not clean. Beneath the polish lived a quiet cruelty. No fists were raised. No screams were heard. Instead, chairs were pulled away just before someone sat. Laughter rose at the wrong moments. Names were not called directly, only bent and twisted until they stung. In this place, harm wore a soft face. Then one morning, a girl arrived who did not announce herself. She stepped through the gates with a small bag on her shoulder and eyes that looked forward, not up. Her uniform was neat but plain. Her shoes had known many roads. She moved like a breeze that does not ask permission. When others laughed loudly, she passed without turning her head. At the notice board, a girl whispered, "Who is that?" Another shrugged. "No idea. She looks lost." The new girl stood quietly as names were called. When her turn came, she answered softly, "Here," and the sound did not try to be more than it was. A teacher glanced at the paper and paused. "Scholarship." The word hung in the air like smoke. "Government support?" a girl muttered behind her hand. "So she's one of those," another replied, lips curling. She was seated near the back, where attention rarely reached. Around her, bags rested on desks like trophies. Phones buzzed with messages from drivers waiting outside. She opened her notebook carefully, as if it mattered deeply. At break time, no one invited her to sit. She ate quietly, eyes lowered, hands steady. When a girl bumped her shoulder on purpose, she only stepped aside. That evening at home, her aunt asked gently, "How was the school?" "It is big," the girl replied. "And the girls? They are loud." Her aunt studied her face. "Remember," she said, voice low, "the river that makes the most noise is often the shallow one." The girl nodded. She understood this language well. Back at school, the distance around her grew clearer. She belonged there by right of learning, but not by birth of power. She was a seed planted in proud soil, unnoticed, underestimated. And in that place of shining floors and quiet harm, something ancient had begun to wait. Her home sat far from the tall gates and painted walls of the school, in a neighborhood where roads were narrow and evenings arrived early. Tin roofs rested low, and the smell of cooking fire drifted through the air at sunset. Children played barefoot, their laughter free and careless. Here, no one spoke of power or family names. People spoke of rain, food, and tomorrow. She lived with her aunt, a woman tied to her by blood but shaped by fear. The aunt woke before dawn, swept the yard, and spoke little. At night, she counted bolts on the door twice. "We stay quiet," she often said. "Quiet keeps us safe." The girl listened, not with bitterness, but with understanding. This home was small, but it carried the weight of survival. Each morning, the girl washed her uniform by hand and hung it where the sun could reach it. It was always clean, always pressed with care. Her shoes, though, told a longer story. Their soles were thin, the leather soft from years of use. At school, I noticed this first. One girl nudged another and whispered, "She dresses like she's trying too hard." Another smirked, "Trying to hide where she comes from." The girl heard them. She always did. But she kept her head down, her mouth closed. Her silence was not empty. It was full of choice. Still, they laughed. "Why doesn't she talk?" someone asked loudly. "Because she has nothing to say," came the reply, followed by giggles. They mistook calm for weakness, not knowing that some rivers run deep because they do not rush. Inside her, there was a steadiness that did not come from books. It came from lessons learned long ago, lessons about waiting, watching, and carrying dignity like water in a clay pot, slowly, carefully, without spilling. When others bragged, she listened. When others insulted, she breathed. Once, a teacher asked her, "Why are you always so quiet?" She answered softly, "Because not every thought needs a voice." The room fell still, but the moment passed without meaning for those who did not know how to hear. There were nights when her aunt locked the door early and lowered the lamp. "Your father wanted this," the aunt said once, her voice trembling. "He said the world is not kind to daughters of broken crowns." She said no more. She never did. The girl understood enough. She wore a small bracelet on her wrist, made of faded beads tied with old thread. It was not decoration. It was memory. Each bead had touched the hands of those who came before her, leaders, mothers, watchers of the land. When her fingers brushed it, her spine straightened without thought. One afternoon, a classmate pointed and laughed. "Is that some village charm?" The girl only smiled faintly. "It helps me remember who I am." At night, before sleep, she knelt beside her bed and whispered words taught by a grandmother whose voice still lived in her bones. She greeted the ancestors, thanked them for breath, and asked for patience. No one saw this. No one needed to. In the quiet of that modest home, between worn shoes and whispered prayers, a hidden strength grew. The girl slept knowing that silence was not absence. It was preparation. Her words were few, each one landing like a drumbeat in the silence. When she spoke, the classroom paused, not out of fear, but because the weight behind her voice carried wisdom older than her years. "We must finish the exercise quietly," she said once, and the room listened, even those who had never respected rules. It was not loudness that commanded attention. It was presence shaped by patience and knowledge, the kind that comes from lessons whispered in shadows of palaces and courtyards long gone. She carried more than quiet authority. In the recesses of her mind, memories lingered, images of a kingdom fractured by betrayal. Her father's advisers, once sworn to protect the crown, had turned on each other, spilling secrets like water across stone floors. She had not lived that day, but she had heard its echoes, the clash of steel, the shouted curses, the betrayal that tore the heart of a home apart. That history, though silent to the world, was stitched into her spine, giving her stillness a dangerous strength. Her father, the fallen king, had faced a choice no ruler wishes to make: the throne or his daughter. He chose her, sending her into exile where her life would be shielded, though the kingdom crumbled without him. The lesson she had learned from him, whispered in hurried letters and private notes, taught her that love sometimes demands invisibility. To survive, one must become a shadow until the time is right to step into the sun. At school, that sun shone in unfamiliar ways, casting new light on old divides. Other girls noticed her immediately, not her grace or poise, but her worn shoes, the simplicity of her uniform, the modesty of her bag. Eyes measured her carefully, quickly drawing lines between wealth and worth. "Look at her," one girl whispered, nudging another. "Can you believe she goes here?" Whispers followed her like a persistent wind. Laughter, sharp and thin, marked her as different. She was excluded from conversations, blamed for mistakes she did not commit, mocked for the modest food her aunt had prepared, and teased for her accent, which carried the soft intonations of a home far from marble floors and polished gates. Each act was small, almost invisible, but together they carved hollows in her confidence, the first cuts of humiliation forming where pride and curiosity should have lived. The cruelty grew in quiet ways. A group project ignored her suggestions, leaving her ideas unspoken. Lunch tables shifted to avoid her. Notes passed in corners whispered insults she could hear but could not reply to without drawing more attention. Each slight seemed minor to those who inflicted it, yet for her, it was a weight pressing steadily against her back, testing the strength her father had fought to preserve. She endured it all with the same calm she had carried from childhood, but inside, every small act of mockery became fuel. Her silence was not surrender. It was strategy, a quiet preparation for the moment when her strength, inherited from bloodlines both royal and wise, would speak louder than any laughter could. And so she moved through the polished halls, unnoticed by many but observed by those who mattered most, the ancestors watching in beads, in whispered rituals, and in the patience woven into every careful step. Each slight, each laugh, each whisper became a drumbeat in the rhythm of a story still unfolding, a story of a girl who carried kingdoms in her silence. The teachers watched from the front of the classroom, their eyes trained more on the ledger of wealth than the ledger of merit. A girl from a powerful family raised her hand, her jewelry catching the sun from the window, and the teacher nodded quickly, praising her answer. Another girl, quiet and careful, offered insight, but her voice was soft and her uniform plain. The words fell like stones into water, barely noticed. The teacher smiled politely, then moved on to the next question. In this place, wealth wore the crown of authority, and respect was measured in the shine of shoes and the brand of a bag. Justice had become a currency, and the poor girl's voice was a debt unpaid. In the corners of the classroom, whispers began to weave into patterns, small sounds finding courage in numbers. A remark here, a snicker there, grew bolder. "She's so backward," one girl murmured. Another added, "I don't know why she even tries." The quiet laughter became a chorus, moving from shadowed hallways to the very benches where she sat. The cruelty learned to walk, slowly at first, then confidently, as though the air itself carried the invitation to join. Leading this invisible army were the daughters of power, girls born into names heavy with influence. Their fathers sat in council chambers and boardrooms. Their mothers' words shaped the city's culture. At school, these girls wore their heritage like armor. They whispered instructions to others, guided the laughter, pointed out faults. "She's nothing," one declared, the words rolling like drums. "Watch, I'll show you how weak she is." Family shields made them fearless, and their cruelty became organized, almost ceremonial, like a dance handed down through generations. The poor girl became a story, told without her consent. She was no longer a student with hopes and fears. She was the quiet one, the village girl, the outsider. Conversations followed her in hallways, and social media carried her name like a warning. Even the lunchroom became a stage for public commentary. Every act of laughter, every sideways glance, reduced her identity until it seemed fragile, as if a single word could shatter it completely. Words were sharp, shaped like knives hidden in velvet. Backward, worthless, invisible, these labels became truths in the eyes of her peers. Teachers, still blinded by status, rarely intervened. Each insult was a brick in a wall separating her from belonging, a barrier built with smiles and nods from those who confused privilege with wisdom. Her dignity was tested quietly, and the hallways carried the echo of lessons learned too soon. In this school, language could erase, and silence could protect. Yet beneath the weight of mockery, something deeper pulsed. The girl's patience held steady, her gaze never pleading, her body moving with calm deliberation. She was a seed planted in arrogant soil, observed and underestimated, waiting for the time when strength and truth would rise. In the chaos of whispers and laughter, the tension built, a drumbeat of anticipation echoing from the corners of the polished hallways. Something was stirring, unseen but undeniable, a force grown quietly in shadow, ready to meet the world on its own terms. The laughter began softly, like water trickling over stones, but it did not stay contained. It followed her through hallways, around lockers, and into the open air, carried further by voices that typed faster than tongues could wag. Social media became a river, and she was a stone thrown in its current. Every post, every whisper, spread her humiliation beyond the classroom walls. The girls she had passed quietly that morning now became commentators, judging her shoes, her uniform, her soft voice. Parents and neighbors glimpsed snippets of her life through glowing screens, and shame walked beside her even in the narrow streets of her neighborhood. Yet she did not cry out. Her silence, deliberate and calm, was misunderstood. To them, It was surrender. "She doesn't fight back," one girl laughed, elbowing her friend. "Just look at her. She's already lost." The confidence in their cruelty grew, feeding off the assumption that quiet meant weak, that stillness was cowardice. But they could not hear the pulse beneath the calm. They did not know that patience sometimes carries the strength of rivers that carve valleys. The battlefield was invisible. There were no bruises, no cuts. But every whispered insult left a mark on her spirit. Notes passed in corners, sideways glances in the library, the subtle pulling away of friends, all became instruments of pain sharper than any blade. Fear settled in the classroom like a cloud, heavy and unseen. Her heart beat steadily, but the tension wrapped around her shoulders like chains. She moved with care, knowing that this was a fight fought with presence and endurance, not arms. From memory, her grandmother's voice rose, soft but insistent. "The river does not shout before it bends the stone," she whispered to herself. "The wind does not boast, yet it moves mountains." The lessons were old as the earth, teaching restraint, patience, and the quiet strength of those who understood that power often sleeps before it strikes. Tradition became her armor, invisible yet unyielding. She remembered another saying, "The drum waits before it is struck." The beat comes at the right moment, not before. Timing, patience, and preparation, these were her weapons. Every insult, every exclusion, was a drumbeat in the rhythm of her own story, a story waiting to rise in its own time. Her thoughts drifted to corridors she had walked long ago, in another life. Marble floors that gleamed like sunlight on water, tapestries that told histories older than most of the teachers she now faced. She had run her fingers along carved railings, learned to walk with quiet authority, spoken in rooms where every word mattered. Then she had been a princess, carrying dignity as naturally as breathing. Now, in this school of polished floors and petty cruelty, she felt the contrast keenly. Humiliation pressed upon her, but she carried within her the echoes of palace walls, the memory of robes that never needed to be defended, and the strength of ancestors whose eyes watched even now. And so she moved forward, head held low in appearance only, while the drum of patience echoed in her chest, waiting for the moment when its strike would be heard across all the corridors of power, both seen and unseen. She had learned long ago that leadership was not measured by applause, but by how quietly one could carry responsibility. At the feet of elders, she had listened to stories of kings who ruled with patience, mothers who shaped villages with words, and warriors who moved with restraint. Her childhood was filled with lessons on the weight of silence, the power of observation, and the strength that comes from listening before acting. Every gesture, every careful choice, was a step in mastering authority without need for spectacle. Outside, the world seemed loud. Voices clashed and doors slammed, girls shouted to be noticed, parents measured worth in jewels and branded shoes. But she remembered what her grandmother had whispered, "Power that shouts is easy to see. Wisdom that waits is the one that moves mountains unseen." So, she did not speak over the chaos. She did not fight the shouts. She watched, learned, and measured, letting the noise of the impatient remind her of her own steady rhythm. Some of the girls laughed at what they called old nonsense, mocking the beads on her wrist, the small prayers she muttered before meals, the tiny rituals she performed in the quiet of the dormitory. "Why is she always bowing and whispering?" one asked. "It's just superstition." They did not remember the words of their ancestors, the lessons passed down in songs and drumbeats. They had traded memory for pride, culture for imitation. Yet she held her head high in the knowledge that her connection to those who came before her was not a joke. It was armor, invisible and unbreakable. At night, she knelt beside her bed, her palms pressed together, and spoke softly to ancestors who still listened. "I am here," she said. "I walk with your eyes upon me." Her whispers carried the weight of generations, calling on guidance, patience, and protection. The words were small, but in them lived her defiance. She refused to let mockery shape her spirit. Each prayer was a drumbeat of resistance, a reminder that the world's laughter could never reach what was sacred within her. She moved through the school with two faces, the quiet bent figure that endured the mockery, and the inner self that remembered crowns, corridors of marble, and the dignity of her birthright. One face suffered the world's judgments, the other prepared silently for the moment when strength would reveal itself. The split was heavy, a tension between survival and destiny, but she carried it with the calm of someone who understood the patience of rivers and the stillness of the forest before a storm. Even friendship tested her patience. A girl she had trusted, who once shared stories under the mango tree, now laughed with the others, whispering cruel remarks she had once sought to shield her from. "You don't belong here," she had said once in secret. Now, she chose acceptance over loyalty, letting power dictate kindness. The betrayal stung, but the quiet girl remembered her grandmother's teaching: loyalty is a treasure, but the heart must survive first. Pain was felt, but it did not rule her. It was catalogued, learned from, and added to the rhythm of her inner drum. Through all this, she moved like a shadow carrying sunlight, a girl taught by elders, tested by peers, guided by ancestors, learning that silence is not submission, patience is not weakness, and tradition is a river that flows beneath the stones of arrogance. She endured, watched, and waited. The time for reckoning was coming, though none yet knew its beat. Her aunt's home was small, the walls thick with the smells of firewood and maize. "Zara," she said quietly, pressing a worn hand on the girl's shoulder, "the world will not bend for you. Endure. Speak too much, and they will see you. Survive first. Truth can wait." Fear was a teacher here, silence a shield. Every word unmeasured could become a weapon in the hands of others. The girl nodded, bowing her head, carrying the weight of patience like an heirloom passed down for generations. At school, the silence continued to shape her. Crowds pressed around her, students talking, laughing, moving like rivers around rocks, but she remained unmoved, alone yet unbroken. Her spirit held fast. No push of gossip, no glance of scorn could crack her. She walked between them, eyes forward, calm as the earth that bore her. The loneliness stung, but it was tempered by a quiet strength. Even in isolation, she moved with purpose, her dignity intact though invisible to those who watched. Rumors spread like sparks in dry grass. "They say she is cursed," one girl whispered behind her back. "Look at her, so strange, so quiet. Something is not right." Fear replaced understanding, and whispers gained teeth. Children crossed to avoid her, and some smiled nervously, unsure whether her silence was meekness or magic. Superstition cloaked her presence, but she felt only the pulse of her ancestors guiding her. The teachers, bound by tradition of authority twisted toward privilege, refused to intervene. Heads nodded politely at the loudest students, while her small voice went unnoticed. Authority bent to wealth, and injustice became formalized. A girl who dared nothing more than exist quietly was measured not by character, but by her lack of silver and silk. The world she navigated was ruled by appearance, not truth. Then came the announcement that shifted the air. "Next week," the headmistress declared, "our annual cultural celebration will showcase leadership and talent. Every class must present." The words were simple, but for the girl, they trembled with danger. The stage would bring all eyes to her. Laughter would have a target. Silence would be tested. The bullies sensed it too. In corners, they huddled, whispering, plotting. "She'll never survive this," one said, a smirk on her lips. They rehearsed their mockery, timing their jokes, imagining the final humiliation. Confidence swelled. Cruelty was an art perfected in the echo of their own laughter. Unseen by all, forces from another life stirred. Elders from distant lands, guardians of ancestral secrets, and old allies moved quietly, like wind through forest leaves. They had not forgotten the girl who had once walked palace halls, who had been trained to observe, to wait. The hunter danced, unaware that the lion was awake and watching. And so she remained, still as stone, her hands folded lightly in front of her, breath steady, eyes calm. Every whisper, every plot, every moment of scorn only deepened her resolve. Silence held its weight, tense and heavy, waiting for the right moment to strike. The air bristled, and the story, patient as the drumbeat of her ancestors, was poised to unfold. The day began with banners fluttering in the sunlight and music spilling through the school courtyard. It was a celebration, or so the sign said, but the air was thick with anticipation of something cruel. Parents adjusted their seats, teachers smiled politely, and students whispered secrets behind hands. Amidst the colors and pomp, pride and cruelty walked hand in hand, unseen by those who mistook laughter for joy. "She still wears those shoes," one girl hissed, her voice carrying over the crowd. "Look at her bag. Patches, holes. Can you believe they let her in here?" The words were sharp, their meaning deeper than mockery. They were a whip meant to humiliate. The crowd, hungry for spectacle, leaned closer. Children giggled nervously. Some teachers exchanged uneasy glances but did nothing. She walked to the front, her back straight, palms clasped lightly in front of her. Eyes scrutinized every movement, voices judged every breath. "Is this the girl?" murmured a parent, frowning at the simple dress she wore. The whispers grew louder, a rising tide of ridicule. The laughter was no longer hidden, it was a public whip, cracking across her dignity. Every giggle, every pointed finger felt like a strike. Her silence stretched long and heavy, each pause a mountain between her and the taunts. The hall seemed to close around her, every sound amplified, every glance a weight. The quiet was not surrender, it was endurance, but no one could tell. Stones could not press so heavily as the stillness that filled the space, pressing down on the girl who had learned to carry patience like armor. The ground beneath her name began to feel uncertain. Faces blurred into sneers, words carved hollows where confidence once lived. Her identity, her history, the value of her mind and spirit, appeared broken in the eyes of the crowd. A simple girl, a scholarship student, the invisible became painfully visible, and mocked. Then, footsteps came, slow, deliberate, resonant with authority. Silence shifted. Heads turned, whispers faltered. Something ancient had entered, disrupting the dance of cruelty. The laughter stumbled, faltering under the weight of eyes that did not belong to the school, eyes that remembered what others had forgotten. Elders entered, draped in flowing robes of indigo and gold, adorned with beads and staffs that spoke of generations. Their presence commanded a hush that swept through the courtyard like wind over the savannah. The ancestors seemed to breathe through them, their authority palpable. Murmurs of respect replaced whispers of derision. Even the teachers straightened, unsettled by a power older than titles, older than wealth. The hall felt smaller beneath the weight of tradition, and the girl, once humiliated, stood a little taller, shielded by forces that had never truly left her side. The eyes that had laughed now watched in uncertainty, the voices that had mocked now trembled in silence, and for the first time that day, the balance of power began to shift. The crowd's laughter froze like water caught in winter. At the edge of the courtyard, figures appeared, guards in crisp, dark uniforms, their spears catching the sunlight, flanked by men wearing flowing robes embroidered with gold and indigo. These were not strangers. These were council men, elders, the living memory of a kingdom that had been whispered about in old songs, now stepping quietly into the present. The air shifted, heavy with authority that had not been seen in generations. The girls who had jeered at every stumble and stammer faltered, their smiles trembling. "Wait, who are they?" one whispered, clutching her polished notebook like a shield. Confidence drained from their eyes, replaced by confusion. They had built their cruelty on assumption, on the idea that silence was weakness, but now the ground under their arrogance cracked. A deep, resonant sound began to echo through the hall, low and measured, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The royal drum spoke first, commanding attention before words could be spoken. Every beat carried memory and warning, every strike reminded the listeners that truth had its own voice. Students froze, parents glanced around, and the teachers finally straightened, sensing the weight of a power far older than any school hierarchy. Elders carried staffs carved with ancestral symbols, beads strung like the veins of the land, emblems of bloodlines long forgotten by the city that had grown in shadows over the kingdom's memory. Each step they took was deliberate, a rhythm that told a story more ancient than the walls surrounding the school. Whispers of disbelief spread as the physical symbols, staffs, beads, emblems, confirmed what many had refused to believe: the girl at the front was of royal blood. A voice, strong and steady, broke the silence. "She is the last heir of the house of Olayinka," it declared, and the hall trembled with the weight of the name. The murmurs stopped, laughter died on lips. Parents stared, students gaped, and teachers could only blink, realizing they had been witnesses to humiliation aimed at a princess in hiding. The story unfolded slowly, revealing betrayal hidden behind smiles and loyalty twisted into greed. She was the sole surviving child of a throne stolen by false allies, a kingdom undermined by those who coveted power over honor. The girl's exile had been chosen by her father, not as punishment, but as protection. Love, foresight, and survival had outweighed the lust for crowns and applause. As the truth settled like evening mist, the crowd realized the depth of their mistake. Humiliation had been directed at someone who carried history, lineage, and wisdom in silence. The girl stood, quiet still, but no longer invisible. In the presence of drums, beads, and elders, her dignity was restored, and the foundations of authority shifted from arrogance to truth. The kingdom, though absent, had arrived, and the last heir, once hidden, was finally recognized. The girl stood in the center of the hall, and her silence no longer seemed timid or small. Each word she had withheld, each gaze she had endured, transformed now into a quiet authority. Patience, her grandmother's voice echoed in memory, is the training of a ruler. Every cruel laugh, every mocking whisper had been a lesson for her, not a defeat. The restraint she had worn like a cloak became visible as discipline, and the hall felt its weight. Eyes that had once jeered now widened in disbelief. The room shivered with collective realization. Students, teachers, and parents alike felt the sting of their wrongdoing. Whispers turned to silence, and the arrogance that had ruled the space faded. Shame replaced laughter, and a deep, unspoken guilt settled over those who had thought power could be measured by wealth or volume. The girls who had led the ridicule shrank back as if the air itself had turned against them. Their confidence, once so sharp, dulled in the presence of truth. I didn't know," one stammered, staring at the calm figure before her. We were wrong," another admitted. The power they had wielded like a weapon crumbled, leaving them exposed to their own fear and regret. Parents whispered among themselves, teachers averted their eyes, and authority figures recognized their complicity. They had mistaken silence for weakness, status for virtue, and in that moment, every error became visible. The room, once a battlefield of cruelty, became a chamber of reflection. Yet the girl did not raise her voice. She did not shout or demand vengeance. Her calmness, serene and unwavering, radiated authority more potent than any roar. Her dignity alone commanded respect, as though the hall itself bent to acknowledge it. A hush fell that no one dared break, and in that hush, she ruled without words. Her true royalty needed no crown. It was seen in her composure, her wisdom, the way she bore injustice without surrender. Every observer felt the weight of authority emanating from her, unspoken but undeniable. The hall understood that power is not shown through noise, but through restraint. The moral settled, heavy and bright, like sunlight on dark water. Power that does not shout commands the loudest silence. The girl's lineage, her identity, her ancestral pride, all of it stood firm without begging for recognition. Blood that never demanded respect now claimed it by right alone. And though no golden crown adorned her head, every soul present felt it. The crown was invisible, yet omnipresent, felt in the shift of energy, in the humility of those who had erred, in the reverence of tradition restored. The girl remained quiet, yet she had never been louder. In that moment, the throne was hers, not by display, but by truth. The hall was quiet now, the echoes of laughter and mockery replaced by a weight that pressed upon every soul present. Celebration had ended, and the truth, heavy and undeniable, settled over the school like an ancestral drumbeat. The grandeur of the event felt hollow, overshadowed by the revelation of the girl's lineage and the cruelty that had been unleashed. Pride faltered. The spectacle was no longer entertainment. It was a mirror reflecting the heart of wrongdoing. Teachers and administrators stood stiffly, realizing that their silence and favoritism had failed those who needed protection the most. "We have looked away too long," the headmistress admitted, her voice trembling. "And in doing so, we allowed injustice to flourish." Reputation, once a shield for the powerful, crumbled. The institution itself was forced to see its reflection, a hall filled with wealth, but empty of vigilance and care. Discipline was measured carefully, not as vengeance but as teaching. Names were called, apologies required, and actions confronted with fairness. Punishments were assigned with the precision of a rainfall, steady, necessary, without cruelty. The lesson was clear: wrongdoing carries weight, but justice need not destroy, it must restore balance. The bullies lowered their heads, the air heavy with shame. Eyes that once gleamed with laughter now flickered with fear and remorse. They had wielded words and wealth like blades, yet the girl had endured, and now the power of truth shone brighter than arrogance. Some knelt, voices shaking as they whispered, "Forgive me," while others retreated behind walls of pride, unable to admit weakness. A hush fell when an emissary approached the girl with a letter, gilded yet simple, bearing a seal that pulsed with history. "Your path awaits," he said. "Your throne is not lost, only delayed." The weight of destiny pressed upon her shoulders, and she felt the pull of bloodlines and duty. But she did not rise in anger, nor did she accept comfort without thought. "I will not claim power through revenge," she declared softly, her voice carrying across the hall, steady and unwavering. "I will choose education, service, and the protection of those who cannot yet speak for themselves." Her words carried the authority of one trained not in shouts but in patience, a leader shaped by trial and restraint. Mercy tempered her judgment. To those who sought forgiveness, she extended it without forgetting the lessons learned. "Go and learn humility," she said, "but remember that the quiet ones carry strength you cannot see." Her eyes scanned the room, catching glimpses of fear, relief, and the faint stirrings of conscience. Finally, she turned to the administrators and teachers. "I insist that reforms be made," she said. "No child should suffer in silence as I have. Protect those who wait, and honor the dignity of every student, regardless of wealth or name." Her words, simple but powerful, planted seeds for change that would outlast any crown, any title. In that moment, the school understood that true authority comes not from fear, nor from gold, but from the courage to protect, the wisdom to forgive, and the strength to act for justice. The air in the school felt lighter now, as if the walls themselves were taking in the lessons of truth and consequence. Where fear had once nested, hesitation and reflection began to grow. Some girls lowered their eyes, hands folded in quiet acknowledgement of the harm they had caused. Whispers of apology floated softly across the hall, carrying with them the weight of humility. It was not a sudden transformation, but a gentle turning of hearts, the first signs of redemption in a place that had forgotten how to care. I never realized," one girl admitted, voice trembling, "how heavy our words could be. How much they could hurt." The former bullies, who had once wielded laughter as a weapon, now felt the weight of humility pressing upon them. They saw for the first time that cruelty was a mark of weakness, not power. Respect replaced mockery as they began to understand that strength comes not from dominance, but from restraint and fairness. Teachers, too, began to see with new eyes. They noticed the quiet strength that had always been present, the dignity in a girl who spoke only when words mattered. "We were blind," the headmistress confessed, her hands gripping the edge of the podium. "We judged by names, by wealth, and by appearances, but that was never the measure of worth." Authority shifted from status to insight, as values realigned with true justice. Change rippled slowly through the school. Policies were rewritten, small gestures of care became ritualized, and culture itself began to bend toward empathy. The corridors once filled with whispers and jeers now carried the soft hum of understanding. It was gradual, subtle, but undeniable, a school slowly rewritten by truth. An elder, called upon to speak at the end of the day, stepped forward. His voice carried the cadence of old stories, each word deliberate and measured. "The river does not rush to the ocean," he said, "but it reaches its destiny nonetheless." Students and teachers alike absorbed the proverb, feeling its weight settle like dust in sunlit corners. The girl who had once been mocked, the quiet one who walked without noise, now stood as a living testament to that wisdom. The metaphor of the chick and the eagle became real in every glance she cast. Though small in presence, she held the shadow of greatness within her. Though small in presence, she held the shadow of greatness within her. Those who had doubted now understood. True strength need not announce itself. Patience, proven stronger than pride, had guided her. Silence, once mistaken for defeat, had shown itself louder than noise. And worth, measured not in applause, robes, or gilded halls, was now recognized in the courage and dignity of a single girl who had endured. She walked forward through the school courtyard, unadorned by robes, unguarded by retinue, yet every step commanded respect. The crown she wore was unseen, yet its weight pressed upon every heart present. Heads bowed not to gold, nor to titles, but to the quiet majesty of one who had never needed to shout. Above, the ancestors watched, their spirits stirred by the restoration of balance. Justice rested, heavy and sure, like the drumbeats that echoed through the villages long ago. The tale ended as it had begun, in the rhythms of African storytelling, with lessons felt, dignity honored, and the unseen power of truth acknowledged by all who bore witness.